If that's all right with you, we will move forward. Dr. Blunt, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, my friend. Okay, we can go to the next one. Dr. Lucas is cool. All right, so again, good evening to everyone. Thank you all so much for being on it. So what we're sharing on tonight is kind of a dynamic that engages in both dialogue, discernment, and deduction as it pertains to where we are with our churches from a thriving perspective, but also as it pertains to what is now known as the quote unquote post-pandemic church. We're aware that there is a number of academic venues that are now really being grounded in the work of what's considered to be the post-pandemic church. But we use those words kind of subtly and also in quotation marks, so to speak, because we know that while so many persons, including culture and society, would like to believe that the pandemic is completely over. I mean, literally the difference between BC and AD. What we know both individually and institutionally is what? Just like individuals who have suffered through COVID, some of those individuals who have quote unquote bounced back from it, they have what? They have long COVID symptomatic issues and challenges remaining. And so what we know of individuals is the same, both also with the institution as well. And our churches are still dealing with what we now know to be the ravages of the pandemic. And so though we are quote unquote posted somewhat chronologically, as it pertains to our churches institutionally, as it pertains to us ministerially, as it pertains to us from an ecclesial standpoint, we're still dealing with so many of these different dynamics. And much to what Bishop McKenzie was speaking to earlier, you know, where does that leave us as it pertains to our relevance and our existential significance in this age of what the church has not only been, but also where we would like to believe what God is still calling us to become, right? So I want to walk us through some concepts with this dynamic, and feel free at any time to dive in, jump off the top rope, tag in, however you want to be a part of the dialogue. And I am a big, my colleagues know this, I am a huge Star Wars universe, DC universe, Marvel universe aficionado. I am a huge kid about this stuff, right? And for those of you who may or may not be familiar with the Marvel universe, in recent years, what has been depicted probably as one of the greatest cinematic portrayals of a villain has been this cat named Thanos, Thanos. And for the better part of about 9 to 10 films, this quote unquote cinematic villain is traveling all around the universe, gathering what is called these items, these artifacts known as Infinity Stones, the very substance of which the universe was created. His philosophy and his theology is very simple. The universe is overpopulated. We're decimating natural resources. We need a new God. And Thanos' ideology is if I gather these Infinity Stones, I put them all together in my Infinity Gauntlet, literally with one snap, I can recreate the universe in my own image, right? And so all of our heroes come together to do what? Stop this villain from recreating the universe in his own image. Well, if you know the films and know what happens in it, he eventually does it. And with a snap of his finger, half of the universe disappears. He's able to restore it and recreate it in his own image. We call that snap from pop culture, right? Even in ministry and theological frameworks, that snap is literally what we experienced in the church during COVID. It was all good just a week ago. That's what Jay-Z and Too Short said, right? And it seems that 7 days later, out of nowhere, a Thanos perhaps snapped his finger somewhere. This pandemic ravages the globe, changes everything from culture, society, interrelatedness, institutional play, you name it. Everything changes, but in some phases, not as much the church. And we're seeing now the results and the consequences of such, and it's causing us to what? Think anew, think afresh, revisit perhaps what God has called each of us to as it pertains not only to thriving, but also to being faithful. Giovanni said it best in one of her quotations, and I quote, "Everything will change," right? The only question is growing up or decay. Katie Geneva Cannon said it very clearly. She said, "Everything changes in life but change itself," right? And so now that the snap has forever changed the church as we knew it, what are some of the now clear and present challenges that are impacting the institution of the church, the body of Christ, and the role of shepherds? It's a three-pronged dynamic. It's the church as the institution, it's the body of Christ, i.e. individuals, but then it's also us, the shepherd role play, because we are part of, but not yet necessarily part in the institution and or the individual. We are called apart even from that. So it's a three-pronged challenge. And sometimes those prongs aren't parallel, but we have to be considerate and conscious of all three. We'll talk a little bit about that as we continue on tonight. Next slide, my friend. Okay, so there are some symptoms of the post-pandemic church, right? And so you've heard me talk a little bit about these institutional challenges. These are challenges that we know are impacting our church at a groundwork level, right? Grassroots groundwork from the floor to the ceiling. We know that these are challenges, i.e. the state and health of the church. Ministry, that has forever been changed. How we approach it, how we think about it. I'm going to use the word simple, but I don't mean it necessarily from simplistic dynamic. Whether it means meeting in person for meetings or now meeting as we're doing now, that's a different variation even now for ministry. I know here at First Baptist Mayhem, we don't have any more in-person meetings right now. And as far as I can see it, we probably won't return to them anytime soon. All of our meetings, with the exception of some staff meetings done in person, but all of our ministry meetings are done online. What does worship look like? Because that's had to shift as well within the pandemic and even beyond the pandemic. And to some degree, if we're still approaching it the way it was pre-pandemic, in some ways we might be missing the response of the church of where we are now. Our witness, our evangelism, how we're reaching people, how we're communicating Christ, how we are edifying the people of God to come together. How does that look different from the state and the health of the church? Finances. Some pastors will tell you that their churches have never done better financially than what they're doing right now. Others, not so much. Many churches find themselves in dire straits because for many of our churches, literally when the scripture says bring the tithe, that's exactly what folk believe it needs to be done. It needs to be brought to the church, not sent, not given online. It needs to be brought. If there's not a plate being passed, then it's not going to heaven, right? So finances have shifted. And so we've had to really look at ways to recreate and re-explore the narrative of what stewardship and healthy generosity looks like in this season. Staffing is different. I know all of us could talk a little bit about, if not for the rest of the evening, about one of the things that we have discovered during the pandemic is that perhaps some positions that we were staffing prior to the snap, we probably don't need to be staffing those positions in this season moving forward. You think about all the staffing dynamics, there's a creative way to kind of look at it now, whether we had to bring in a marketing person or a branding person or a tech person or a graphics design person or online discipleship person. It's a new staffing reality. And so how do you communicate that? How do you teach that so that your church can be in a position to thrive? Servanthood, what does that look like when persons are not really in the building per se as they used to be, if that's still the case? Accountability, how do you hold people accountable that you literally can't touch physically, but they may still have an existential presence and accountability and investment in the church? What does that look like? Because you may not be able to say now for membership, if we haven't seen you in 6 months, we're going to take you off the active membership roll. Well, now I may not have to come every Sunday night. If there's an online possibility, I may be committed to being online. So you have to rethink that dynamic. Even what we're doing in the school right now, the majority of our students, everything is just about online now. And so even the school has had to shift its ideology as it pertains to the agency of students in this season of the pandemic. Missions, self-explanatory, and then congregational agency. How do we make applicable a sound theological fabric where persons understand that whether they are literally in the sanctuary physically or online, that they have just as much agency, not only in the eyes of Christ, but also in the heart of the church. And that's a challenge that we have to be open to, because we have to realize that our witness is different in this season, and how do we expand upon that? And so you have these institutional challenges, but you also have what I call this gravitational pull, this black hole, so to speak. Astronomers would tell you that the most powerful force in the created known universe, outside of pulsars and nebulas, is the strength of a black hole. It is unmatched with its celestial power, right? And there seems to be this no matter what we're trying to do progressively in the name of Christ, in the name of his bride, the church, trying to still push forward in this quote unquote post-pandemic, post-snap era, there is this sense of take me back to the old ways, right? I want that old thing back. I forget who used to sing that song, that hymn. I got to research that during break. I'll come back with it, right? We want to go back to that which was, literally, right? Because we're more comfortable with that. So no matter how much you're pushing forward, there appears to be this gravitational pull to take us back to the era that was pre-2020, never realizing that era is gone and more than likely will not return. And so how do we approach that with intentionality? Where we were versus, this is not good grammar, but it just sounds great. Where we were versus where we is. Where we is versus where we are headed. Because God is calling us not only to be where we are, not only to affirm where we've been, but also to move forward as well, right? And so there's this pre-pandemic identity that oftentimes does clashes with the culture of the church. You have a remnant in the church that literally wants to go back to the things that were, for various reasons, because they have investments in that season. You have another remnant of the church that's completely comfortable with the way that things are right now, because it's literally like a revolution has taken place. Old things have passed. Political investments, power investments, pew investments. And so you have a remnant that's now saying, okay, hey, look, we don't have to do things the way that we used to. We don't have to go through this bifurcated system of politics and power and politics in the pew as much as the way things used to be. And so there's a threatening reality that comes with it. And there's now this blue coat, red coat tension in many of our churches that probably was always there, but not as much visible because of where we were with the pandemic. And so that speaks to the tension that we're with the former versus the future. All that's a part of the gravitational pull. In the middle of all of that, we have to deal with the struggle of the sacred self. Because there's the institution, there's the individual, and then there's us. So there's a thing about our own health, our own well-being. Many of us didn't take a break, didn't have the luxury of having a vacation during the pandemic. What did that look like? Right? We did, I recently had a meeting, Dr. Flowers, and it was brought to my attention by a remnant from a former age. It was brought to my attention that if I was going to miss another Sunday, going somewhere else out to preach, that they was going to revisit my compensation package here at the church, and that I wouldn't be paid for those Sundays that I'm not here. Not when I'm on vacation or sick, but when I'm preaching somewhere else. So if Sessoms invites me to come up to Northern Virginia to preach on a third Sunday and I'm not here, I was told in a meeting that I wouldn't be paid. And I've been at this church 21 years, right? It was probably already there, but they never had the force to articulate it till it was post-snap. And so now you have to have the conversation of if you're going to dock my pay for not being here as a full-time employee of the church, then that would suggest that you're already compensating me from an a la carte paradigm, which means in order to deduct my pay, you have to first pay me according to what I would contractually make on the road. And if that's not a conversation we're having, then really ethically you have nothing to deduct, right? But there's a what? There's a tension because that's the season that was. And their argument is you need to be here every Sunday now that we're here. And my argument is I've been here not only 21 years, but the 3 years there was nobody in this building. Guess who was here every single Sunday recording something, making sure that something was able to go out week after week. You all just have the luxury of choosing to come now or not come at all. I didn't have that luxury. But there's this tension of that, right? And I know it's deeper than that, but we have to be the ones that are very intentional about what? Our own health, our well-being, being honest when we are tired, fatigued, exhausted. There is a tonnage that comes with this call. There was an article that came out. I got to put my hands on that article. There was an article that came out that stated that for all full-time pastors during the pandemic, that 1 year in the pandemic was the equivalent of dog years. So if the pandemic ran for 3 years, respectfully, then that means that each of us gained 21 years of pastoral tonnage during the pandemic alone. So if you've been pastoring 10 years at your church, technically when they do your anniversary this year, have them add 21 years to it because that's what it's felt like, right? So there's a tonnage that comes with this thing. And I think we do a disservice not only to the grace of the Lord, but also to the calling and the profession when we put on this thing that we are, we're from Krypton or something. There's an S on our chest, and I don't mean saved, super, and that we can handle all this. No, we need to be able to, at times, advertise our frailty and let it be known that we are weary, that we are tired, that we need a break. And this is really not up for discussion, but we need this time to kind of re-energize ourselves because there is an impact on our families. There's an impact on this dynamic of pastoral guilt that many of us are wrestling with. We kind of have taken on the whatever state the church is in. Those of you who love the church, we love the church, we're invested in it. There's a part of us that feels guilty for the way that things are going right now. And so we wrestle with that. That's not something we can say in the microphone from the pulpit, but in our quiet moments with God, we wrestle with what did I miss? I'm supposed to be the shepherd, the watchman on the wall. How did I miss this? How was I not prepared, right? And we blame ourselves, which is really, really characteristically what the adversary wants us to be in this season, okay? So you have the institutional challenges, got this black hole gravitational pull, pastoral challenges, okay? I'll pause for a moment for the calls before we get to the next slide, but any comments, anybody want to tag in on any of those three dynamics? We're just talking about symptomatic realities of the post-pandemic church so far.
Yeah, Dr. Blunt, I thank you because you have articulated what I was feeling and did not understand what I was feeling. But much like you, held the church together, and they said that, you held the church together for the last 2-3 years. And then, so you had these moments, and I'm sure all of us have, where you went into these ups and downs, you hit the wall, you kind of bounce back, hit the wall again. But over the last 3 months, I hit a wall and didn't feel like I wanted to even come back from that hit. And I didn't realize what it was. I thought I had paced myself well. But you've helped me with that 7 years, like dog years, that helped me. Because that's probably what's going on.
Yeah, Dad.
I've been pastoring 30 some years,
That's
right?
exactly
Not 14, 30 plus years.
Exactly
And,
what it is.
the toll that took, and didn't realize it until you said it. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. So I thank you for that. And I'm looking for that article now, and I'm sure going to use it at some point.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up, Doc, and I'll make sure I get it to you, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you, bro.
Yeah, man, because that's where we are, and there is this expectation of perhaps more so than ever. We're all academicians. We all know the history of the church. When all of this is chronologized again, all over again, the genesis of the African American experience, you're going to have several pillar, quote unquote, moments categorically. And once you start talking about whether it's brush arbor genesis origination of the Black church, whether it's post Civil War, whether it's Reconstruction, whether it's civil rights, whether it's post civil rights, whether it's you get into the 80s migration of the Black church, the next pillar is COVID. It's COVID. And in each of those phases, the church has always been threatened with some type of existential reality. But this one is different. This one is different. And many of us are wrestling with not only the weight of it, the tonnage of it. I perhaps in the first time in my entire pastoral career, I've wrestled with what to preach. And some weeks, to be very honest, I have, I haven't really, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. But to be very honest, Dr. Harrison, some weeks I've been like, you know what? Danny used to talk about gift preaching. and some weeks you get by on your gift, right? But there's a weight with it, whereas I feel like I spent all I had during the pandemic. And now that everybody's back, I'm kind of like, okay, I want to go to the Beyonce concert and I really don't want to come back for about 3 months, but we understand the weight that comes even with that, right? But there is a tonnage to this, and we're not the same persons that we were pre-snap, and we have to have some onus with that as well. And that's the only way we'll be healthy. That's the only way that we'll be healthy. But yeah, 7 years for every 1 year. For every 1 year.
Dr. Blunt, I'd like to say too that I feel the weight of that myself, because I've lost some near and dear and very supportive members.
Oh man.
During this time. And I realized, so now I'm retired military. I was deployed in Iraq, seen some things, came back, and I was just psychologically a mess. My daughter saw my symptoms and she pointed out, Dad, you got PTSD, you need to go get help. I did that. And that started in 2013 up until this day. Even now, I appreciate monthly seeing my therapist, because it has helped me dealing with, these dear members, because it seemed like it takes something out of me.
That's right. Each
time a member of yours died. Especially those, now, let's be honest, there's some folk, they think I'm sad that they died. I'm giving God praise, but then there's others who are near and dear and supportive. I mean, it hurts you to your heart. Right. It hurts you to your heart, because it seems like more of your good folks are dying,
right,
than the ones that's actually giving you hell.
Right.
When you ask the Lord, what in the world? But I guess that would keep us on our knees. But no question. I just want to say amen to everything that you said thus far.
Praise God. You're not the only one, Pastor. I've done a few funerals this year, and I've actually asked the Lord, Lord, I can't tell you what to do, but if you would just consult with me, I've got a list. I got a list, and you can pick any number of names off this list if you need to, but leave these alone over here. These are, so I understand, and it seems that every time the fiery chariot comes, that's what happens, right? But I understand completely. Anyone else?
And I think the balance that we have is, pastors, we have all of our personal relationships, those things are also weigh on us. I lost during this time, I lost a granddaughter, I lost a daughter, I lost many other family members who were not members of the church, some very close friends from other spaces, and because of this pastoral identity, there, we feel the weight of that also, and having a family around me, and I'll say even my family around the School of Theology has been extremely supportive, and knowing that those connections are still intact, but the way that we view uh, who they have been to us and what they have contributed to our lives, often the trauma of those negative experiences only emphasizes how much we need each other and that we are actually in this thing together. And we have persons who are there to listen and even be confidants if we need that kind of support. But it does happen that pastors kind of isolate themselves and just look for another dose of the Holy Ghost and try to preach their way through the trauma. And to some extent that works, because your gift can make room for you in another space. But the fact of the matter is, we're in it together. And when I saw the reality of me not being the only one going through that stuff, it gave me a deeper appreciation for pastors of any size congregation. That takes, you have to, I don't know how people actually can be a pastor without having a call. There has to be some kind of divine unction to function at the junction, of that was a great old blues song. I just don't function at the junction, but it is everything converges, and you're still feeling responsible for being the conduit of a message of deliverance. Person even look upon you as the one who can be the mouthpiece or the prophetic voice or the priestly presence. All of that to me means the same thing. That you have, in some ways, dedicated your life to this. But I don't think, I think what I'm hearing from everybody is just because you dedicated your life to this doesn't mean you need to let it kill you. And there's help out there for your mentality, for your physicality, for your spirituality. And I think my background from the Pentecostal church, it's a concentrated effort on the spiritual side, but not really as much on the other sides. So they kind of live a schizoid experience where your face and your body and everything shows up on Sunday in the pulpit, and folk think you are walking on air. And when you finish preaching, you sit down, somebody has to help get you up because you are spent. You spend all your time trying to help everybody else. And I think this is going to be helpful. This conversation is going to be helpful because, you can't lose yourself because you're so concerned about proving to others that you are what they expect you to be. And in preaching class, we deal with those kind of issues a lot. Major thing is integrity. If you can't be a whole person and recognize that other people have the same right and privilege to do that, then perhaps you need to turn in your preaching papers and find another profession.
Amen. 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 And I think what's so very helpful with that too, Dr. McKenzie, is that, and this coincides sacred self, individual, institution, even from a ministry standpoint, to, and I'm so glad this is a safe space, to be okay as a pastor with things that have died. To not take on the weight or the pressure trying to revisit a tomb with Lazarus in it, when really what we're being called to is let Lazarus stay in the tomb. He's in there. The word says he's already in the decaying process, right? And what we've been kind of compelled to do is kind of revisit some of the things that COVID has completely removed. But we feel guilted and turned and weighted underneath the burden and the pressure that we got to bring this back. Because that's that gravitational pull. Pastor, we got to do this back. We got to bring this back. We need to do this. We need to do that. Some of that stuff may very well be able to come back in a new form, a new imago Dei, so to speak. But some of that stuff, we need to give the burial rights to it and let it be. And there's a pressure that comes with that. And the integrity piece is critical, because unless you're in a space where you're surrounded by individuals, because the first few years of the pandemic, there were a lot of lying pastors, Doc. There were a lot of lying pastors. Oh, Doc, I'm good. Doc, I'm good. Oh, ain't nothing wrong over here, Doc. Oh, Doc, Doc. And a lot of lying pastors, Doc. And I didn't have to search long, but I did look high and low for a while. Like, is anybody in the red like me? Is anybody not making budget? Is anybody just ready to kind of say I'm sick of all this and y'all? Where's that group? That's the group I need to go have communion with, right? And it took a while. And then once persons kind of got past that, then you started seeing a little bit more of the transparency, right? And I think that's part of it as well. Being able to have those healthy relationships where persons can really be honest and be like, Dr. Harrison, things are going okay. They could be better. Or no, things are not going well at all. You need to be able to say that and have the latitude to know that it's safe to be able to articulate that and not be judged or even have your affirmation weaponized against you, right? So absolutely. Mr. President, we know you're on, so I know your mic is not working, but you can put anything in the chat there, sir, and we'll gladly utilize it as part of the engagement as well too. And so, and Dr. Hudson, we're glad to have you on, sir. Thank you so much for being a part of our sharing on tonight. And so, we talked a little bit about this, so we can keep it pushing from the ministry standpoint. There are some things that we just have to do them differently. Worship has to be. One of the things that we learned during COVID is that particularly those of us, whether you were in person still throughout, or if you had to go completely online, the attention span had to be curtailed even more. So if you're doing something online, you can't do the 2-hour service that you were doing in person. That thing had to be curtailed now to 75 minutes. It is what it is, Or people go to a movie and they watch a 3-hour movie, or they go home and watch Netflix, or they watch a football. Yes, they do. They also go to football games in 30-degree weather and pay money to sit outside and watch their team lose. I get it, but they're not going to do that in church. And so we have to be the ones who are the visionary shapers of the institution. So ministry has to be creatively different, still significant and relevant, but creatively different. Worship, how we witness evangelism, how we approach finances, certainly with staffing, being able to say that, hey, look, these are some positions that we won't be continuing in the future, but this is what we need moving forward. One of the things that we wrestled with, that we're still wrestling with, that's part of our political power shift dynamic here at our church, is that we had to, so during the pandemic, we had to end up hiring people to do something that none of my current staff was able to do. Once we got on the other side of the snap, those people said, okay, hey, look, we did this because we have a relationship with Pastor. But if we're going to be doing this moving forward, our relationship with the pastor is not going to pay our mortgage. And we want to be paid the going rate. And so we know that this kind of like it was a nuclear arms race. Everybody was what? Just like we used to churches would compete for musicians. It was the same thing for, online ministry directors, graphic designers, the whole nine. So long story short, we had to pay a couple, by the way, that are members of our church, but Sessoms, they live in Atlanta. They're not even here. And we had to pay them a salary that's second only to the pastor. After the pastor, it's this couple. And so that created a power shift in some of the other staffing dynamics because they felt that, one, they should have been making that kind of money. Or now this is a different voice that comes to the table because everybody that's been leading during the pandemic, they weren't deacons, they weren't trustees, they weren't elders, they weren't in those traditional bifurcated board paradigms. We had to bring people to the table to help the church get through the system. And now that we're in this new season, these people are at the table and they're like, okay, we don't necessarily have to have our hands on the steering wheel, but you can't put us out the bus now either. Right? And so that's a shift. And for some persons, they interpret that politically instead of seeing that as part of the edified body of Christ. You got to work through that, right? So you have the staffing, you have the finances, you have your missions, you have your congregational agency. How do we make everyone feel like they have value, regardless of who they are, where they come from, and or in this season, the demographic that is beyond the four walls, because we have that reality as well. Beyond institutional challenges, next slide. And we talked about the black hole effect. We can go to the next one. And we dealt with this too. We kind of already touched on all of this. If you're not careful, you end up becoming David Banner. You look in the mirror one morning and you think you're getting ready to go to church, and the reflection in the mirror is not David nor Bruce Banner, but it's the Incredible Hulk, right? And it's the Hulk that wins that day, right? So you have that. Beyond pastoral challenges, next slide. And so again, we go back to the quote. We end where we started, right? Much like the phoenix, just like the same Kufa bird, from the ashes again is new life. Everything will change. There's only one question. Are we going to adapt to it? Are we going to grow in it? Or are we going to decay and die, right? And so guess what we don't have? We don't have an infinity gauntlet. We have no infinity stones. We have no meta-human options available to us. Much as I would love to have any of the superpowers that come with any of the Avengers. Black Panther's not coming to help us. Captain America's not coming. Spider-Man, Wolverine, X-Men, nobody's coming. All the challenges that are before us are chastening us to either grow up, to grow with it, or we're destined to decay in it. And we have the choice as to how we're going to approach that, how we're going to engage that. And I dare say, if we're not careful, we're going to start saying, I was talking to a colleague of mine with the General Baptist State Convention in North Carolina. In the first quarter of this year, they have some 23 churches in the state that have shut their doors forever. The United Methodist Church has their national conference coming up, I think, in another 2.5, 3 months. And they are wrestling with, I think the number is somewhere around 28 to 20, close to 30% of their pastors have put in their paperwork from 24 months ago to retire at the end of this year, right? So the shift has already taken place. The snap is already here. But I think it's also more of an opportunity, if we're able to see it as such. It's an opportunity for us to really be the pioneers in this new age and to really be able to help shape the terrain that will be advantageous, maybe not completely for us. I mean, I know that's problematic to hear, but it could be Dr. Flowers, that much of the work that we're doing, that we're the Moses generation now. It's not as much for us to see it necessarily get to the promised land. It's for who's coming behind us, right? But we have this responsibility to help pivot the church, because otherwise, if we're not careful, the generation that is now is not the generation of 50 years ago. The generation of 50 years ago, it didn't matter who was preaching, didn't matter what choir was singing. You could have the meanest pit viper in the world as the chairperson of the ushers ministry. Fuss, cuss anybody out that's coming in the church. Them folk would still, oh, that's just who she is. That's just who he is. I'm still going to press my way to the house of the Lord, right? That's not the culture now. That's not the generation now. And so unless we have this adaptation where we're going to be intentional, it's really going to be a draconian forecast in some cases for where our churches could be in the next 10 to 50. That used to be 30 years off. Pandemic has cut some of those years off. Next 10 years is really going to tell the state of where some of our churches are going to be. And so we have to redefine thriving, because it may not be, as Dr. Lucas says, it may not be a packed house on a Sunday morning. You can't necessarily, it's not as much, who was that said, was that, who was that said, that was, yeah, Bishop Walter Scott Thomas said, it's not as much how many people are in the church anymore, it's how much they weigh. And that was 20 years ago when he said that. How much do the people in your church weigh? You can have 1,000 people in your church, but if put them on the scale, they weigh 200. Or you can have 85 people in your church, but you put them on the scale and they weigh like 1,000. You know, how do we have that pedagogy understood so that our churches can be more affirming and just realize that we might not be able to do much about the snap, but we can be very vigilant and faithful with where we are right now in this season. So any comments, anybody want to jump in at any component of the tiers of that?
And I want to think about, like, for all of us, we sort of feel like our congregation's got to be one of the ones to make it at the 10 years, right? We're hopeful, we feel like our congregation's got to make it. And that's not going to be the case for every congregation. I think one of the pieces of wisdom that we need to start to consider is that maybe this congregation as I know it, maybe we've reached our run. It's very difficult to change the culture of a congregation. And so, maybe 10 years is a good horizon for us. How do we plan for that? How do we think ahead to? And every congregation has this choice. When a congregation dies, which frankly takes forever, that congregation can either be dead, like stinking dead, decayed, or they can be compost for what comes next. And so for all of us, I think we need to be thinking about, is it our time to compost some thriving ministry that will follow us here? And, I hope that all the congregations in this room are the kind that are going to thrive beyond. But I also want us to be okay with the idea that maybe thriving looks like composting a new thing that's going to thrive into the next generation. Sometimes it's difficult to look at an end as a hopeful thing. And I think we need to start to think about those things too.
So I can speak from a pastoral perspective who actually went through that, because I birthed the church, planted a church in Dumfries, Virginia, pastored for 5 years. And then we had to close the door because I lost my contract and had to move to South Carolina. And so that's one of the hardest things that I have ever had to do, knowing that God has called me to this thing. God, you gave me this. Okay, now you're telling me to give up my Isaac. And so we made that shift, which was not easy. It was it's before the pandemic. But at the same time, you go through the guilt. You do what you can to help the folks transition. So we had a good transition plan to where there's another pastor that came in and we set them up. It wasn't under our church name, but he was a good young man, and we we put them there. But that's something that I had to face, I had to deal with. And I couldn't see it then, but had I not done that, I would not be where I am right now. Seriously. Because when I came back, I tried to start another church again. Tried to plant it again, just wasn't working. You know, those old folks, they wasn't trying to hear from me. You shut the church down. So now I'm still dealing with that. Now I'm questioning my call. God, is this what you really called me to do? And so I just started supporting ministries, you know, in the National Capital Region. Some people would call me a church hopper, say what you want, but I was providing ministry support to different churches, whether it be in the music ministry department, helping folks out, technology ministry. And that's how I was introduced to STVU. I was serving in a music capacity, and they said one of the requirements is that you get some form of education. Introduced me to STVU, and now here I am, doctoral candidate Timothy D. Lucas. And so I said all that to say, you know, to kind of footstep what Dr. Jansen was saying. Sometimes you may be faced with that option. Okay, do I continue on in the vein that I'm going now, or do I make a shift? And if I make that shift, it's not necessarily the end of the world, because all things work together for good to them who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. So if God is calling you to make that shift, it won't be the end of the world for you. It won't be the end of the world for the congregation, because the church is going to stand, whether it be this congregation or this, you know, local church. The church is still going to stand. Those folks are going to be all right.
Anyone else?
And we are not uncomfortable with silence. We will
Well,
wait.
I think one of the things that all of us are going to struggle with for a while is this notion of attendance. We're trying to work through that, because that's what has meant so much to us in terms of charting progress or anything else, growth. It was about attendance. I grew up, you had to attend church. My parents had to attend church. Everybody attended church. And until the pandemic, that was the way we thought. What I'm seeing that's happening in the community, in the church, in Smithfield, Virginia, is that that's not very important anymore. And, you know, I'm not too sure that I'm with it yet, but I think I better get with it. What is important is coming to some type of understanding of what the church's function and role is going to be in the community. And having said that, we are operating from this new mantra that church attendance is not the most important thing, but being the church in this community is going to be what's important. And so where I'm struggling to get people back into the sanctuary, I don't have to struggle to get them to events like volunteering to help people when they're doing COVID vaccinations and COVID testing. Any of the community style service projects, I've got plenty of people that'll show up for those things. But on Sunday mornings, you know, where is everybody? And I think that we are working beyond what we understood as a symbol, a visible symbol for a thriving church. And that was simply attendance. We're not there anymore.
That's so powerful. Sometimes I think going to church is the easy thing. When we ask people to do the faithful thing, which is be the church.
Be the church.
They'd much rather go to church because It doesn't take us out of our comfort zones.
Exactly. I was thinking of that same word, comfort. I'm comfortable with this.
Yes.
I'm not comfortable with that.
Mhm.
And so it's an easy choice. I'm going with comfort, but we're not there anymore. And so in that respect, I'm having conversations around the notion that the pandemic was a good thing.
Mm.
Because I think the pandemic has really said to the church, either you're going to be or you're not going to be. And so many things that we were doing before the pandemic in the name of church were not necessary, and they only gratified us.
Mm.
I looked at some of the community service projects, and the members are the first people in line.
Mm.
If we're going to feed the hungry, the members are feeding themselves first. I don't know, maybe there's some legitimacy in that. However, I don't think that you need to overfeed yourself and then there's none left for the object of the project.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
But we get lost. We get lost in that. And I don't think that is the purpose nor the function of the church in the world. We are re-identifying our own neighborhood now as our first field of mission.
Mm.
You must be the church. And this is an incredible opportunity that God has given to us to be the church.
Dr. Blunt was talking a little bit about agency. And as you were talking, I thought about that. So you talked about attendance. So how do we view membership? Okay, who's a member of the church? And of those who are members, is there a difference between those who are in-person members and virtual members? And how do we engage them? So that may mean sometimes that we may need to revisit our bylaws to determine who's a member. Because if I'm a virtual member and my family member passes away, you're my pastor. Can I depend on my pastor to come and preach the eulogy? You know what I'm saying? But, that's something that has to be discussed within the context of that congregation, because everyone might not see it that way. And I can't remember what session that was, Dr. Blunt, you talked about that, but I thought that was so powerful. And local churches need to think about that and how they approach what it means to be a member of the congregation.
Yeah, we've had to re-identify and recategorize the notion of church membership. And I think many churches are calling it global membership. But it has given us an opportunity to do all of that. And something interesting about the pandemic. Normally, we have an opportunity to plan for the future. We have an opportunity to get ready for these changes, these big changes, and they come gradually. But we're in this thing. We literally went from the third Sunday in March of 2020 to the fourth Sunday in March of 2020, having to figure out how we were going to be reaching the membership. We didn't have any time. All of this is in our faces, and we're going to have to make give up the farm, and that created an unusual set of circumstances. And this whole notion of recategorizing. I had a lady from Phoenix, Arizona, who followed us on Facebook, and she was basically with us for every service. And she called me one day and said she wanted to join the church. I'm thinking, well, how in the Sam Hill are you going to join church in Smithfield, Virginia, and you in Phoenix, Arizona? And I said Sam Hill. I did. And so we thought of this notion of recreating categories of membership and what level of service we were able to afford each of those categories of membership.
the interesting thing I think that comes to mind is that the pastor and pastoral leadership get caught in a vortex. You know, and knowing which direction to go, knowing how to be attached, but at the same time not hanging on to tradition,
Right.
having an appreciation for the journey and the road that brought us to where we are, and recognizing that that road seems to have run out, and now folks are ready to take to the air without having a flight plan.
That's right.
And
That's it.
then you have the pastor sometimes pretending to be the pilot, and I can find no other help but understanding and knowing how to yield to the Spirit of God.
That's right.
And that means sometimes I've got to say to myself, I'm not the power that gets this done.
That's right.
I'm not the authority that will, in the final analysis, have the last word. I'm a partner with the rest of the congregation and the other members of the community that are going to benefit from whatever this church evolves into.
Right.
And that evolutionary process is oftentimes a mystery to us.
Mhm.
And there's nothing really wrong with a mystery, because a mystery will keep you engaged, continuing to explore. And I think what's going on with persons who have some forward vision is that they are not afraid to at least explore.
Right.
And when I hear Dr. Lucas, and I hear Dr. Harrison and Dr. Blunt and the rest of you all speak, I'm hearing some folks who are not in this group by accident, because we're going to have other persons who are going to be introduced to this too, because pastors are already in the vortex. You know, we have pressure over here and pressure over there, and persons who support. And I say pastors, I don't mean necessarily the person who sits in the center seat in the pulpit, but the persons who have the vision and the ability to provide the necessary leadership for persons to evolve. I mean, when we say grow in grace, uh, grace just means the space God makes. You know, grace is the space between where you are and where God's taken you. But in the meantime, you trust God and the God that shows up in your partners. Because the people, if God intended for us to have the whole vision, to understand the whole story, to see the end of the whole process, then we would be all alone in this endeavor, and it will kill each of us individually. But together we live and thrive, or separated we die and decay. And some kind of way, uh, this exploratory mission to me is exciting. I don't know where I'm going to end up at, but I might be in the wilderness for 40 years. I might be going in circles, but I'm not really as worried as I would be if God was not with me. I just go back. I almost every time I think I'm about to be lost, a song comes to me, and most of the time it comes from my ancestors. I don't believe He brought me this far to leave me. Those kind of things. The gospel singers made something else out of it, but underneath it is a message. And the fact is, if God is who we think or believe God is, then God is with us. The worst place to be is where God is not. I don't want to create a space that excludes the divine presence. I can have the best mind, I can have the best resources, I can have the best intentions, but it ain't gonna be the church if God is not in it. You know, I mean, folks, have you been in a service where everybody was shouting and you didn't feel anything? Probably because God was not in it. You know, there's too much personality worship, all of that kind of stuff that leaves God out. And here we are, a group of folks who want to remind folks the center of this thing is God. The pastor is not the center of it. The deacons are not the center of it. God is the center of it. And if we have to use advanced technology to demonstrate that you don't have to be in the building, but you got to be in the race. You've got to make a contribution. If you're serious about this, you are going to support the effort of that thing that has given life to you. And I am encouraged hearing you guys talk. Because let me tell you the truth, sometimes I think I'm doing it by myself. You know, I don't know if anybody else is really doing this or understand this. Even the ones who look like a success. Because if you'd go by what they say online, they're going like gangbusters. If you go to their church is in the same shape yours is in. There are only a few that may have a lot of folks, and they've been tricked into being the church by various, and excuse this language, somebody might be offended, by using holiness tricks. Folks who are playing holy but not living holy. You know, and that bugs me because there are too many pseudo, Pseudo, pseudo Pentecostals out here who think they are revisiting Pentecost because somebody's shouting or somebody is stutter speaking. You know, it's a pet peeve of mine. And when we come together and have a serious discussion like this, I have hope. I can see the light. The tunnel is dark, but there's light at the end of
it. We have to embrace the notion that God is still in charge. And if there was no pandemic, what conversation would we be having together tonight?
Mm-hmm. I want to say that, and all this is good. God knows I'm enjoying all this. But I had to move from fussing because I found out, my wife, she's the first one to get on my case. Quit fussing. Mm-hmm. You can't make people do stuff, And, I didn't want to hear it at the time, but I knew she was right. And so I've really gotten comfortable, though, seriously, with the way we're doing things now. Maybe about 40% of our people attending in person. We have a huge number of folks because we spent about $60,000 and putting cameras, high def cameras, revamping our sound and all that stuff. And the one of the things that I have a problem with is that we pay people in our church to do those things, and they are not really, they don't have it. Some people are willing. I'll never forget this. What's the pastor of the Life Church over there in Richmond? The Life Church. I'm talking about. her name, but anyway, she's from Portsmouth. And she said, and one of the questions was when they was had a panel at Virginia Union about when they were starting churches, what was one of the main mistakes that you made in starting a church? And she said, I put people in place who were willing, but were not able. Mm-hmm. And I got people in our church who are handling audio, handling video. They willing to help, right? But they are not trying to get better. Mm-hmm. You know, and some of my colleagues have said, man, you know what? We just actually paid the people who installed it. They come and just do it, and we pay them something every week, and they just do it, and it's flawless. Of course, I would like to do that, but a whole lot of folk feeling would be hurt, you know, and I'm not willing to take that battle on at this point. And so I've been in this particular, I pastored 3 churches, 2 while I was in the military, 1 in Alaska, 1 in Hampton, and then this one when I retired. But this church came from a hurt place. Church split, all the good paying members left with the former pastor. They went through a 10-year period wherein the power structure wanted somebody safe that they could control. They put that person in who was an associate, and the church died. About 35 folk were coming to church. And then they said they wanted someone, because I'm surrounded by mega churches, Grace Church, First Mount Zion, Lutheran, and some others. I'm surrounded by them. And so I'm the smallest one, one of the oldest established, but one of the smallest one. But it came from a hurt place. And so before I got there, they amended the bylaws to make the chairman of the deacon board the ex officio. Yeah. But the pastor is the overseer, which is an oxymoron. So now you have a system that's not going to work, butting heads, because as Dr. McKenzie used that word pseudo, that chairman thinks he's the pastor. You see what I'm saying? And so we're always constantly butting heads. And so I have to find, the Lord has blessed me to use wisdom. I just work around it. And because ain't nothing they can do it, because the majority of the folk support me 100%. And so my thing, and I come from a Pentecostal background too. I come from a Pentecostal background, where we wore black suits. All we could wear were black suit, blue suits, and that was it. Sisters had to wear hats and all that kind of stuff. I come out and I believe in shouting and all that, but then the Lord had to mature me coming into the Baptist church. That because you shouting, that don't mean you have church. But now I know you having church when you can rejoice over the word. That and people's lives are changed. And so I have become comfortable now in that space that, hey, you know what, we are doing well. We don't really, we had to replace all of our AC units, right? That was $94,000, and we were able to pay that in cash. And so we're blessed in that area. We're blessed in that area. Thing is, we're down a rural country road. Come to my church because you intentional. You don't come there, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. You come to my church if you come there. And then I was worried too, because we went through a long stage that nobody was joining. I was depressed and all of that. And the Lord had to remind me, take me back to the book of Acts, that on that day of Pentecost, that the Bible said that the Lord added to the church. And so and when he reminded me of that, boy, you talking about the pressure that I was relieved from, because my deacons and trustees and all of what you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Ain't nobody joining. You preach a good sermon, but ain't nobody joining. And I just told them what the Lord told me, and you can take it for what it's worth. but that's what the Lord says. So, but again, as you said, Dr. McKenzie, I'm grateful for this safe space, because now I know I'm not by myself.
I've been in Little Union. Yeah, you don't just find Little Union. You got to be going there with a GPS. I'm telling you. Yeah, I visited there when I backed up Dr. Shaw when he played out there. But one thing you were talking about, I think you said something like you have folks who are willing but are not able, and that's something that we need to take a look at as a church. Is where are we investing our resources? I think Dr. Blunt, you hit on that a little bit. Where are we investing our resources? So I've been blessed to not only have the ability to play music, so the minister of music, and at one point in history, the minister of music was the dude. That's the one you wanted to hire if you wanted your church to progress. Okay, now we're in this era where, all right, you can have a good music department, but your technology ministry better be on it too. So instead of just getting volunteers like Dr. Blunt did, you might have to hire somebody to manage your technology, and not just the technology ministry, because when we talk about that, we just think about the live streaming piece of it. But there's a whole social media aspect to that you need to think about as well. We're only in church, what do you say, 75 minutes at max on a Sunday morning? But what about the rest of the week? Everybody, everywhere you go, got one of these things in their hands. Where is your congregation as it pertains to how we engage on social media? And it doesn't have to be, we have a whole, as you go through this program, this Thriving Congregation, we do a whole section on thinking theologically about technology and ministry. So I think that's really going to be a blessing. But that's something that we need to think about. Where are we investing our resources? Are we getting the best that we can with what we have? Are we doing the best we can with what's in our hands? And I'm not going to monopolize the time, but I also was thinking about there are some folks who love the Lord with all their heart, but they ain't coming back to church. Still saved, got the Holy Ghost, and that with the mighty burning fire, but they ain't coming back into church. Why? Because they have gotten comfortable, and they see that they can still love the Lord, they can still have a relationship with God, they can still engage in ministry in some capacity, right from the comforts of their own home. What are we going to do about that? We can fuss about it. We can complain about it. We can, throw scriptures at them all day. But that's a part of the congregation that we need to think about. How are we going to minister to this population of individuals who are not going to step foot back into the church sanctuary? So you have those. And then you have a hybrid. You have some that they're going to engage some on Sunday morning, and they're going to come in on some Sundays. That's a population all in itself. How are you going to minister to that population? And then you got the diehards. I don't care what's happening. I'm coming to church because this is what church is. All three of those populations of people, from now on, we're going to have to engage. So we need ministry strategies and how we're going to engage each of those populations.
I'd like to say it just to put a dime on that dollar, like Zora Neale Hurston would say, right? As well, Dr. Lucas, what you were saying, and everything that's been shared, and also what Pastor Selson was just sharing. I think part of this, that gravitational pull, we were just talking about it, right? So part of what you're articulating as a challenge, and man, we've all been at, and trust me, what you're wrestling with is not a rule pedagogy. All right, that's just church, bro. I promise you, I'm pastoring the second cousins of your members. I promise I am, right? But part of the dynamic is this too, right? Pre-pandemic, pre-snap, particularly for traditional mainline churches, most pastors were seen or perceived as paid employees. That's what we're seeing as. Paid employees. Oh yeah, on the covenant, on the contract. Yeah, it's got pastor, priest, under shepherd, all that stuff. But when the rubber meets the road, you get a check like everybody else on the staff in here. You are a paid employee, right? Pandemic comes, and Dr. Jansen, guess what? The paid employee, the staff pedagogy becomes minimized because now, Dr. Rodriguez, we need the prophetic presence. Guess who the church wasn't checking for during the pandemic? Deacon boards. Guess who they weren't checking for? Elders and trustees. Guess what they didn't care nothing about? Church conference meetings. They wanted to know what thus saith the Lord. Prophetic presence took up what was traditionally known as paid employee status. You passed now you passed the snap, you passed the quote unquote pandemic, you got a bifurcated demographic that wants to do what now, Sessoms? They want to move you back to the paid employee status. Because prophetic presence means that we have to be faithful to what God is calling the church to. So that's one dynamic of it, for sure. But the other piece to what Dr. Lucas is talking about is this, and this is what we got to be honest with too. Some of the reason that these folk ain't coming back to church ain't got nothing to do with the pandemic. We got to be honest and got to be real. We got to be 100 with the fact that we did not manage, we weren't good stewards of people prior to the pandemic either. So them mean ushers that's been mean as hell for 30 years and ain't nobody sit them down, them mean servant leaders. You have a wonderful service, Bishop McKenzie, wonderful, great seminary, and then them servant leaders get up at the end of service and they stand there like they've been sucking on lemons all day long and mean as I don't know what. 5 people wanted to get their life to the Lord, but 4 of them said, forget that. If they can't smile, I ain't worried about that, right? We didn't manage people the best way we could have, right? One of the things we did, and it upset some folks. I brought in the management team from Chick-fil-A. And I had their HR team walk our servant leadership and our greeters ministry through their process for how they have a culture at Chick-fil-A, right? Because seriously, if they can have that kind of pedagogy towards chicken, certainly we can have that kind of pedagogy towards Christ, right? And they made it very clear that if nobody has or nobody doesn't embrace our curriculum, if at any given time we see or we engage somebody that's a part of this franchise that isn't welcoming, that isn't warming, that isn't, kind and compassionate. I go to McDonald's with my daughters. I ask them for extra barbecue sauce for the it's an 8-piece nugget. They give me 1 barbecue sauce. Hey, look, can I get 2 more for my baby? No, we ain't got no more. You get all that stuff, right? You go to Chick-fil-A. Hey, can I get some more? Sure. How just they drop 20 in the window. You know what I'm saying? And their line stays wrapped around the building 24/7. Part of the reason some people aren't coming back to church, we didn't do a real good job with that. And we got to own up to that. It is what it is. And that needs to be part of how we revisit whatever we do as well, right? You can have the greatest quote unquote ministry offering. You can have the greatest quote unquote product to offer people for the kingdom. But if we got the wrong folk in the wrong place, whether they able, whether they willing, but if they got the wrong spirit, your season is done, period. Because it's costing us as it pertains to the health and the efficacy and the thriving dynamic of the church as a whole. So now I don't know how you go about doing it all the time, but what I do know is this, Dr. Harrison, I got my daddy in me when I say this. Daddy would say, wait on the Lord, but I swear the Lord take a long time. God knows he does.
I'm not going to go against your daddy.
That's all I got to say. That's all I got.
Kim Ridley is the one that made that statement about those who are willing but not able. Kim Ridley.
Okay, any additional comments? So some of the sessions that we're going to have throughout this learning congregation process, when your congregations are on, it's going to be a learning congregation session. And we try to bring on Dr. Kenny to wow us, as we know Dr. Kenny can do. Then we have a session on ethnography. We do an assessment. We do a technology ministry session. Do a session on pastoral care, youth and young adult ministry. And then we talk about next most faithful steps. So of all the things that we learned throughout this process, how do we move? Where do we go from here? Type of session. And so it's a journey. We're not saying that we have all the answers. We engage in conversation. We learn from each other. All of our contexts are different, but everybody has something to bring to the table. So what we will do, we will generate a discussion. We'll spark some interest, but feel free to chime in like you've been doing, and we will definitely, we will all continue to grow.
Couple of things that we would like you to do in the meantime is start thinking about some of the areas that you feel that are important for you to begin thriving in. Look at your churches. I'm sure you have some sense of what that looks like now, but as we've had these discussions, you may have realized some areas that, oh, okay, we want to be able to address these things. How can the Thriving Congregations team help us address that? So start thinking about that. A couple of other things that we would like you to do is to identify some leaders on your team who will be part of these sessions, and please give us their email addresses and contact information. We don't want you to have to be the key person to announce or share with them information that we're discussing, or when our next meeting is or sessions are. So if we have that contact information, we'll be able to go directly to them on your behalf. So if you want to put that in the chat, you're welcome to, or you can email us using the Thriving Congregations email, which I believe all of you have, and I can certainly put it in the chat before we end this session. Are there any thoughts or questions that come to mind?
Right. Just know this is not going to be an overwhelming process. So it's not going to be something going on every month. It'll be definitely spread out. You'll have enough weeks in advance when we're going to try to call you together for a gathering. So not to interfere with what you have going on as a congregation or your denomination, but we just want to let you know that it's not going to be so pressing that you feel that you got to do this every month or every week or something like that. I'm sorry, Dr. McKenzie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I am interested in getting those visual handouts that were used on tonight. If you can send those, because I want to meet with the folks that have been chosen to be a part of the process, and I think that will do a lot to get them jump started with the kinds of things. And it's not like it's going to be the same as sharing with the pastors on tonight, but at least they can see a kind of general direction. The letter was very good. It had the information in it, and I printed that out to share with them. But I think those would also be helpful in our discussion, because the time when I can really meet them is right after service. The pandemic has helped us because the pandemic helped the church to realize we didn't have to be in church long.
Yeah.
To have an effective worship. So we have time after the worship to have meetings like that, when we don't have to call a special session to get them together. They'll be already at church, and we'll just have a little session right after church, and I can present that to them. And they're at the point too, where as good as technology is, they want to see some paper. Yeah.
Okay, yes, sir. We'll have this recording available. And Dr. Blunt, because this is your intellectual property, do you have any issues sharing the slides? Dr. Blunt?
That of that necessity, because if you have intellectual property and so forth, yeah, I understand that, but just a general overview.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll,
Yeah.
we'll definitely get you what you need, sir.
Yeah, okay.
I was kind of being funny with Dr. Blunt. So.
Yeah, we don't want to steal his stuff.
Okay. So our contact information is in the chat. So if you can copy those email addresses, specifically the Thriving Congregations at v.vuu@gmail. If you need to correspond with us, we monitor that mailbox real time. So we will respond if you have any questions. And if you receive an email, it will probably come from that email address. And so we send them out two ways. Sometime I send the directors will contact you directly, maybe through your email or through a text or phone call. But anytime I send anything, it will be from the Thriving Congregation's Gmail. So periodically check your spam mail just in case it goes there.
And you can anticipate that Dr. Blunt and I will text you. Dr. Flowers knows I'm a texter, so I'll be texting you just to, just to hit you up, make sure that you don't need anything or that you're aware that we have a upcoming meeting. So if text is not your thing, just let us know. But I think the individuals who I have the privilege of working with for this cohort are texters, so we should be okay with that.
Okay. Dr. Jensen?
Yeah. So was I right? Did you learn from one another as much as you learned from the presentation? I think that's the gift of this, is you now have colleagues who are in the same storm, if not in exactly the same boat. And these are people who will journey with you over these next 18 months. And we'll be sure that you have contact information for each other in addition to the information you have for the team. As we mentioned at the beginning, the first gathering that includes everyone, pastors and laity, is April 30. And we typically meet from 2 to 4 on Sunday afternoons. If that becomes problematic for someone, please let us know. There are other cohorts meeting in other ways that we can configure this. So if you let us know, we'll do our best to accommodate what your church needs. And it is a privilege to be able to be part of your congregation's lives and your lives over these next months. And we hope that you will engage us in this process. This is more than a program that's pre-planned and set in stone. This is what you need. So as we move through this, I hope that you'll feel free to reach out and to offer feedback and to bring your questions so that we can be the most effective team we can be for you and in your congregation's thriving. As we close, I want to invite Tim, you haven't prayed in a while. Let me invite Dr. Lucas, if he would, to pray with us as we close.
Well, we will. So God, we honor you. We bless you for your presence in this place, in this space. God, we thank you for all those that are gathered on this call tonight. God, we thank you for all that was shared. Father, we believe that we have been blessed, that we're not leaving this place the same way that we came, that we're motivated, we're inspired, we're encouraged to move forward, to push our congregations forward, to push each other, to move to the next level in you. We ask that you bless us as we depart from this place. Dispatch your guardian angels to protect us, keep us from all hurt, harm, or danger, so we can meet again. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you all so much for being part of this. Hope you have a good evening.
Right.
Thank y'all for being on.
All right. Take care.
All right.